It is no secret that Generation Z is essentially captured by the ideology of leftism. Indeed, the data couldn't be any clearer. In the most recent midterm elections at the posting of this video, Gen Z went overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party, despite the fact that many Gen Zers said they had wished they had known more about the candidate they were supporting. Not only that, but during that same midterm election, polling data actually establishes widespread Gen Z support for particular ideas and particular concepts. For example, 9 in 10 members of Gen Z said that access to healthcare is a basic human right. 70% of Gen Zers said that gun violence in America is a public health issue. 79% of Gen Zers said people should have the right to decide if they want to continue a pregnancy. Essentially, they support the idea of abortion. All of these different ideas, and also Gen Zers in these same polls listed numerous priorities as their top priorities. For example, 61% said reproductive justice is a top priority, 60% said racial justice, 60% said house affordability, and it goes on from there. We have to ask ourselves, given the social movements that have happened in America over the past few years, such as Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the push for so-called social justice and racial justice, all of which are driven predominantly by younger people, how in the world did we get to this point? Because it wasn't always like this. Well, I believe there are 3 primary reasons as to why Gen Z is overwhelmingly leftist. And it's not because of organic understanding of particular political issues, but is in fact due to, more broadly, ideological capture reinforced through cultural norms that are made for our internet era. So there are 3 reasons why I believe Gen Z is overwhelmingly leftist. Number 1, the internet era has reduced, on average, the ability of Gen Z to be able to maintain very long attention spans, and in doing so, has ruined their ability to deeply understand concepts. Remember, Gen Z is the first generation to be raised almost entirely under the internet era. By the time they were becoming conscious of the world and getting their feet wet in the world, they had a smartphone or a computer or a tablet thrust into their hands. Apps like TikTok or before that Vine were made popular by members of Gen Z because of their ability to introduce short-term content, short-form content that does not require much thought and instead feeds the human impulse for pleasure and hedonism that has overtaken our era. Number 2, and this is one of the more insidious reasons, left-wing ideas generally do not require much thought or due consideration to accept them. In fact, one can accept a leftist ideal quite well without any kind of thought on the basis solely of emotion. And number 3, the public education system has undoubtedly played a role in pushing certain political agendas upon the younger generation in the name of enlightening them. The idea of progressive education has done this quite well. Well, the first point is self-evident. As I've established, according to Nicholas Carr in his brilliant book, The Shallows, which is an expose on the impacts the internet has had on our generation and on the world in general, he notes that there's this division between the literary mind and the digital mind. The literary mind essentially is a mind that is capable of long-form thought that can actually sustain and read very dense literature and read information that requires a long attention span. And most generations before Gen Z actually had the literary mind intact. Digital mind is a product of the 21st century, which essentially assists laziness and uses the human desire not to do much work to deliver information to people. And by doing this, concepts that are important for our political existence, for our social world, all of these things are ignored in favor of sound bites, talking points, and slogans. Now, of course, dumb ideas have been around forever, and dumb ideas have had, unfortunately, dumb consequences, but the internet has given dumb ideas a platform and a way to succeed that they have not had in the history of humanity up until this point. And so a generation afflicted by this problem of knowledge, is one that is susceptible to ideas that as well do not require a lot of thought beyond a soundbite or a talking point. For example, the idea of healthcare being a basic human right. Well, how many of those people polled can actually tell you what it means to have a right, or much less a human right? Most of them can't really tell you. But what a right means is actually a concept that requires a little bit of thinking, a little bit of critical understanding, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of history, all things that are not emphasized on a cultural level for Gen Z or really anyone else in the West except those who decide to live a life of the mind. So you have people whose ability to think deeply is already stunted by the internet's algorithms, and you parse them with ideas that are so simplistic, it's a marriage made in, some would say heaven, but for our culture and the implications thereof, I would say hell. Leftism and progressivism in America really isn't a philosophy of much deep thought. There are progressives indeed that have much deep thought in what they do, and they actually have convictions and principles, and I accept them as legitimate forces in the political world, even though I disagree with their worldview. But leftism's very existence, very core, is one of instrumentality. If you look at the history of progressivism in America, the emphasis has been on using the Constitution and using government, not as tools to officiate and defend first principles, but instead as instruments to carry out a political agenda without any regard for first principles. Progressivism, due to its emphasis on having a managerial power to order society in its vision, will use every single sacred institution as a tool for its own goals, as opposed to seeing that institution as part of a broader framework which makes our country work, which makes our government work, and which provides moral and just government for people. And this instrumentality is so simple that it only requires an appeal to emotion to actually happen, an appeal to emotion to actually be legitimized. So, when you say, I'm going to provide you free healthcare, the apparatus of state power that would require, the amount of money that would require, the potential rights violations that would require by having to force doctors to give their service to certain people, having to force people, like Obamacare did, to pay for their health care. All of that, all those dimensions don't matter because the person is relating to that idea solely from their experience and their emotion. Leftism is so unique in this way that it is perfectly engineered to fit a simplistic worldview. Hence, it's no surprise that a generation that is primed to be simplistic by certain algorithms, by the internet, and by the digital age, believes in a simplistic philosophy of consequentialism. And also, when you have a generation brought up under a public schooling system which seeks to subvert and usurp the role of the family and the role of the individual in pursuing his own self-knowledge, and instead wishes to insert the state in every aspect of life, then you also have a generation that is more primed towards leftism as well. Indeed, it's been public debate in our country for years whether kids should learn about intelligent design or evolution in the schools, whether kids should learn about sexual education in the school or in the home. And the only institution that legitimizes such debate is the public school system, because by association, it has essentially been used as a means to raise kids. Many parents simply send their kids off to public school and they expect the teachers or the staff there to raise their kids for so many hours while they work or while they do whatever they want to do, whatever they do, it doesn't matter. Public schools have become a mechanism to raise kids illegitimately. And then, of course, when critical race theory and DEI began being taught in schools, what happened? Well, what happened is parents began to wake up, unlike what we ever seen before in this country, in any other of our educational debates, and they got involved, and it was a firestorm of fury because many parents who had trusted teachers to teach their kids and instruct their kids and essentially raise their kids, we're now seeing the adverse effects of that kind of authority delegation to these government bodies. Once again, public schooling has for so long in America been used as a means to subvert the role of moral education that the traditional family used to play in America, that the community used to play in America, and instead replaces them with standards foisted upon those institutions from on high by bureaucrats in state boards or in Washington, D.C., who decide what they think is the best for kids to learn. Hence the debate over why sexual morals should be taught in school or the family, when the default assumption of any matter of intimate life should be that the individual should learn that amongst those who are morally required to shepherd them through this world, i.e. their parents. The schools are not parents, but the schools in America have played a role that parents are supposed to play, but have not played for many years in this country. It should be no surprise when you leave TikTok and public schools to raise your kids, and public schools that are oftentimes also captured by institutional leftism, that your kids end up endorsing these ideas. It should be no surprise that after being raised under this digital tyranny of simplicity and short attention spans produced by these apps, produced by the schools, that your kid goes off to college and they get radicalized by college professors in America, a vast majority of whom are also leftists. It should be no surprise. In America, the way that we stop this problem is by emphasizing a few simple principles. Number one, moral education must return. We must teach our children, we must teach kids in general, Gen Z as well, the importance of social obligation, the importance of respecting people's rights, and the importance of pursuing virtue in their own private capacity as human beings. Two, we have to orientate the public school system with a basic sense of respect for moral education. Right now, the public school system does not serve anyone except the people who fund it and the bureaucrats who legitimize it. It does not serve the parents or anything, which is one of the reasons, by the way, that I believe public school should be abolished in America. It is, again, anathema to the family, it's anathema to the individual, and it serves political interest and not genuine education. Genuine education can only exist logically if there is no overarching political interest directing it, because the overarching political interest will always shape the education towards its own ends and own goals in defiance of the goals of refining the child, making them more virtuous, and making them into a man, things that can only really be undertaken in family life, not in the schoolroom. That's the second way. We have to whip our institutions into shape and get rid of those that do not abide by what we need. And very simply, number three, we have to emphasize the role that critical thought, philosophy, and sustained thought should play in a healthy society. A society that expresses itself is a free society, but a society that expresses itself in a manner that is rigorous and actually fosters debate is not only a free society, it is a flourishing society. But when most Gen Z haven't really had that training, that intellectual logical training to foster healthy mindsets and conversations, as evidenced by the rise of safe spaces and the rise of diversity trainings, which essentially say, if you speak against a certain person here that's marginalized, you have no voice and you're going to get in trouble. When you have a society of anti-expression that does not care about rigor and thought, you don't have a healthy society. A healthy society is the foundation for fixing social institutions and the foundation as well for directing our youth how to use the internet in a way that enriches them and helps them pursue their highest good. The solution is not to attack Gen Z. The solution is not to demonize Gen Z. There's two guys on Twitter right now, Chris Mowry and Harry Sasson, both of whom are Gen Z people who support Biden and are quite leftist and really can't justify their positions. You have to understand, they are part of a broader system of mediocrity in our culture and in our institutions, and that is produced by our unwillingness to actually handle these issues. We are to understand these people, approach them with compassion, and do our very best to ensure that Gen Z and everyone else has the ability and has the readiness to face the world for what it is, not what the ideologues in government, the ideologues in these institutions want it to be. Once we have ensured that, Gen Z's leftism will either go away or it will become more refined, it will become more sensible, and perhaps then it will also be reflected within the context of the American experiment so as not to injure it, but to enhance it. In any case, any way, shape, and form. The standard mediocrity we have right now in our culture is not working, and it must end. It must be reversed if this culture is to survive the next generation when they assume power. My friends, love you guys so much. Like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay pensive. Bye, guys.